In 1346, something began to stalk humanity, silent, invisible, and unstoppable. Long before anyone knew its name, people across Asia were already falling dead in the streets. No warning, no explanation, only fear. Today we know the killer was a microscopic organism called Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas riding on black rats. But once it entered a town, it didn't need rats for long. It spread through breath, through touch, through the very air itself. This nightmare would soon earn a name that still chills the world, the Black Death. Its true birthplace remains a mystery, maybe Central Asia, maybe China, maybe the Middle East. But one truth is certain. Once it began, nothing and no one could halt its march. It clung to travelers, grain sacks, caravans, and ships. It followed the same routes that connected the world, and used them to tear it apart. Many historians trace the outbreak's leap into Europe back to the siege of Kaffa in 1347. Besieging armies, dying from the plague themselves, hurled infected corpses into the city with catapults. Soon after, fleeing ships carried far more than sailors and cargo. They carried rats, fleas, and death. When those ships reached Sicily, Constantinople, and the Italian peninsula, the plague ignited like a spark in a field of dry grass. Overnight, families collapsed, towns emptied, priests, merchants, soldiers, no one was spared. And as the world tried to understand what was happening, the disease slipped through every defense. Some clues from Kyrgyzstan even suggest the plague was already killing thousands years earlier, concealed in graveyards long forgotten. By the time Europe realized the danger, it was already too late. What came next would erase between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire continent's population. Streets, farms, and cities would fall silent. This was the opening chapter of the Black Death. People tried to explain the Black Death in many different ways. Some doctors in Paris said the sickness came from bad air caused by the planets lining up in the sky. This idea was called the miasma theory. In the Muslim world, religious teachers believed the plague was either a blessing for believers, because dying from it meant going to paradise, or a punishment for non-believers. Some Muslim doctors said people should not try to fight a disease sent by God, while others used treatments and ideas from Europe and from ancient Greek writings. Today, scientists know the real cause of the Black Death. It was a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. This bacteria lives in fleas, especially the oriental rat flea. When these fleas bite animals like rats, and later bite humans, they can spread the disease. When the bacteria grows inside the flea, it blocks its stomach. The flea becomes very hungry and bites more, and when it tries to eat, it spits the bacteria into the wound. That is how people became infected. Climate change in Asia also played a role. When the grasslands dried up, rodents moved closer to towns and cities, bringing infected fleas with them. Yersinia pestis is still found today in fleas on rodents in many places like Central Asia, India, parts of Africa, and even the western United States. Scientists proved the role of Yersinia pestis by studying old skeletons. In 2010 and 2011, DNA from mass graves in Europe showed the bacteria was clearly present during the Black Death. Later studies confirmed that the same bacteria caused other plagues in history, including the plague of Justinian. Some modern strains of plague even come from the same ancient root as the one that hit Europe in the 1300s. Other theories also exist. Some researchers argue that the disease spread too fast to be caused only by rats and fleas. They think human fleas and body lice played a bigger part, especially in colder northern countries where rat fleas cannot survive well. Some historians also say there is not enough evidence that rats died in huge numbers in places like London, which would be expected if they were the main carriers. Even with these arguments, most experts agree that Yersinia pestis was the main cause of the Black Death. They also think different forms of the plague, bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic, spread at the same time, making the disease even deadlier. So far, no other disease has been found in the old graves, and modern tests strongly support the plague bacteria as the main killer. The importance of hygiene was not understood until the 19th century and the development of germ theory. Before that, streets across Europe were extremely dirty, filled with live animals and parasites that helped spread disease. By the early 1300s, so much waste had built up in cities that French and Italian towns were naming streets after human filth, such as Rue Merdeux, Rue Merdelais, and even Rue du Pipi in medieval Paris. Animals like pigs, cattle, chickens, and horses wandered freely through the streets of London and Paris. Homeowners were supposed to keep the area in front of their houses clean, but many ignored this rule. Complaints described people unable to walk past homes because of the smell of horse dung, slaughterhouse blood flooding streets, and rotten, waste-polluting gardens. In many places, the only sanitation law required homeowners to shout, "Look out below," 3 times before throwing a chamber pot out the window. Early Christians also feared bathing, thinking it was a temptation. St. Benedict discouraged it, and St. Agnes is said to have died without ever bathing. Researchers studying plague origins have proposed several theories. A team led by Mark Achtman suggested that Yersinia pestis evolved in or near China over 2,600 years ago, while research led by Galina Eroshenko pointed more specifically to the Tian Shan Mountains between Kyrgyzstan and China. Later findings showed that earlier samples were biased toward East Asia, and newer discoveries revealed strains in the Caucasus previously thought limited to China. There is no clear physical or written evidence of the Black Death in 14th century China, so China's role in the pandemic's spread remains debated. Some epidemics recorded in China at the time were more likely typhus, and major Chinese outbreaks appeared years after the European epidemic. The first descriptions of bubonic plague in Chinese records do not appear until the 1640s. Graves from 1338 to 1339 near Issyk-Kul contain inscriptions mentioning plague, and recent DNA testing on remains in those graves supports Y. pestis as the cause. Epidemics killed around 25 million people across Asia in the 15 years before the Black Death reached Constantinople in 1347, though it is still unclear whether these deaths were caused by plague. Historians note very high mortality during these years, but remain cautious about linking them directly to the later European pandemic. There is no sign of a massive plague wave sweeping the entire Yuan Empire before reaching Europe. Evidence from Issyk-Kul suggests a small, localized outbreak, not a large-scale epidemic. Research shows that the Silk Road was already heavily disrupted by the 1320s, making it less likely to have spread the plague. There are also no records of Black Death symptoms from Mongol or Eastern travelers before 1346. Some still argue for a Chinese origin, possibly through traders or ships, including speculation that rats aboard Zheng He's 15th century voyages spread the disease, though this remains contested. Studies of the Delhi Sultanate and Yuan dynasty show no signs of a major plague outbreak in India or China during the 14th century. Some historians argue the plague originated near the Caspian Sea, especially since the first clear reports come from Kaffa. Although China's population fell sharply between 1340 and 1370, there is little evidence of a plague pandemic there. War, famine, and related diseases likely caused most of the deaths. Other scholars propose that multiple strains of Y. pestis spread across Eurasia, which might explain why some regions lack clear plague evidence. Another theory suggests the plague may have originated near Europe and spread around the Mediterranean, northern Europe, and Russia before eventually reaching China. Some historians believe the plague started in Europe or the Middle East and never reached China at all, with one theory pointing to Kurdistan as the origin. Plague entered Europe in 1347, likely carried by Genoese traders fleeing the siege of Kaffa in Crimea. During the siege, Mongol forces suffering from plague reportedly hurled infected corpses into the city, though infected rats may also have crossed into Kaffa on their own. As the disease spread, traders escaped by sea, carrying the plague to Constantinople in the summer of 1347. The epidemic there killed the son of the Byzantine emperor, and writers recorded its rapid spread between port cities. The first outbreak in Constantinople lasted a year and returned multiple times before 1400. From there, 12 Genoese ships brought the plague to Sicily in October 1347. In early 1348, it reached Genoa, Venice, Pisa, and then Marseille. From Italy, it moved northwest, striking France, Spain, Portugal, and England by mid-1348, and spread east and north through Germany, Scotland, and Scandinavia by 1350. It reached Norway in 1349 and Moscow by 1353. Regions with weaker trade connections, like the Basque country, some parts of Belgium and the Netherlands, and isolated alpine villages, were less affected. Plague outbreaks often followed shifts in weather that killed off infected rodents, driving fleas toward humans. Malnutrition across Europe weakened immune systems and contributed to the massive population decline. In the Middle East and North Africa, the plague caused major depopulation and long-lasting social and economic change. By autumn 1347, it had reached Alexandria, and by late 1348, it struck Cairo, killing more than a third of the city's 600,000 residents. Bodies filled the Nile, and the plague returned to Cairo over 50 times in the next century and a half. It spread to Gaza, Damascus, Aleppo, Jerusalem, Acre, Sidon, Homs, and Antioch between 1347 and 1349. Refugees fleeing Antioch died along the roads. The disease continued west across North Africa and reached Tunis in 1348, where a Moroccan army retreat helped carry it further. Mecca became infected through Hajj pilgrims, and the Sultan of Yemen brought the plague home with him after being released from captivity in Egypt. Mosul and Baghdad also suffered major outbreaks in 1349 and after. The Black Death hit people fast and without mercy. Most victims started with a high fever, pounding headaches, sore joints, and non-stop vomiting. Then came the terrifying signs everyone feared. Huge swollen lumps called buboes appeared under the arms, in the neck, or in the groin. They filled with pus, turned dark, and often burst, a clear warning that death was close. Many also found strange black spots spreading across their skin, like the plague was painting its mark on their bodies. Some people began coughing blood as the sickness moved into their lungs, a deadly form called pneumonic plague that killed almost everyone it touched. And the worst version of all, septicemic plague, struck so fast that many died before the telltale lumps even appeared, their skin turning purple as their blood failed inside them. Most who caught the plague died within just a few days, leaving towns terrified and helpless as the disease swept through like a shadow no one could escape. No one truly knows how many died. Medieval Europe kept no careful count, only graves. Some say a quarter of all people. Others believe half the continent vanished. One modern estimate reaches beyond 200 million dead across Eurasia. The truth lies somewhere between the numbers and the silence. Cities suffered the worst. Packed with bodies, smoke, and filth, they became living tombs. Paris lost half its people. Florence fell from over 100,000 souls to 50,000. Hamburg and Bremen lost 60%. In London, 62,000 dead rang the bells until they cracked. Villages across Germany disappeared entirely, 40,000 settlements erased from the map. Entire bloodlines ended. Some families were reduced to a single trembling survivor. Others vanished without leaving a name behind. In Florence, chronicler Agnolo di Tura wrote what may be the most painful sentence of the century. "I buried my 5 children with my own hands." Mass graves overflowed. Bodies lay barely covered, dragged out by starving dogs. The living no longer wept. They expected to die. The plague spread beyond Europe, striking the Middle East with equal fury. Cairo may have lost 40% of its people, hundreds of thousands dead in 8 months. Egypt would not recover for generations. The Black Death did not strike equally. Cities collapsed. Isolated villages survived. Scandinavia, France, Western Germany, Greece, Central Italy, they were devastated. But in Iberia, Ireland, much of Eastern Europe, agriculture barely slowed. It was a patchwork of ruin. And everywhere the plague returned. 1347, 1362, 1371, 1382, each wave weaker than the last. Yet every wave still cruel. Physicians began to notice patterns. Fewer sick, more survivors. Still no one could cure it. Science blamed the stars, bad air, God's wrath. Everything but the truth. When a third of the workers die, the world tilts. Labor shortages drove wages sky high. Landowners begged peasants to work. Rents collapsed. Tithes went unpaid. Estates rotted as their owners decomposed. The Mongol Empire, once the superhighway of Eurasian trade, began to fracture. Some researchers even believe abandoned farms changed global climate patterns, allowing forests to reclaim Europe and triggering the Little Ice Age. Death changed the weather. In times of terror, people seek someone to blame. Europe turned on its own. Jews were burned alive by the thousands accused of poisoning wells. Lepers, foreigners, beggars, pilgrims, anyone who looked different became a target. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were murdered in a single day. Entire communities in Mainz, Cologne, and dozens of other cities were wiped out. Survivors fled east, welcomed by King Casimir in Poland. Fear, superstition, and cruelty spread faster than the plague itself. Yet amid the ruin, humanity shifted. Some historians argue the Black Death helped ignite the Renaissance. When death becomes familiar, people cling to life more fiercely. Art changed, religion changed, human society changed. Feudalism, already strained, began to crumble. Scarce labor meant peasants gained power. Inherited estates moved freely in search of wages. The church shattered, lost priests by the tens of thousands. Monasteries collapsed. Faith became personal, intimate, desperate. Even language, even law evolved. And a new word appeared, quarantine, from the Italian quarantino, 40 days, first used in Ragusa, a city isolating travelers long before the plague arrived. By the end of the 14th century, Europe was not the same continent, younger in numbers, but older in spirit. A rising middle class emerged, born not from prosperity but catastrophe. The church rebuilt, developing new practices, devotions, and forms of worship. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed an age. But from that ruin, a new world emerged, one that would shape centuries to come. In art, in science, in faith, and in the fragile understanding that life could vanish overnight.